Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of some rather disturbing encounters with crazy exes that you'd rather never want to meet again. I'd like to thank everyone who has contributed to the app campaign. We're still going strong. Please get your donations in to make this dream a reality. Thanks, guys. Also, warning. Tonight's stories can be a little bit disturbing and are certainly not for minor audiences. You have been warned. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Grab your pepper spray and let the darkness take control. My name is Henry, and I live in a run-down town in the English Midlands. This particular town is semi-rural though, and is surrounded by farmland, paddocks, and on one side the estate of a duke. There are also at least 3 small areas of woodland dotted around within the town, one of which is very close to my school, filling the gap between the local athletic track and the train line. It is best accessed by crossing an old bridge that is now covered in grass, but once had itself carried a train track. I suppose this must mean that most of the trees there were planted within my parents' lifetime, after the railroad connections were overhauled. I'm now in my late teens, but this story takes place several years ago, when I was 13. I was a hormone-driven adolescent, and in some ways still naive. Also, I was, and still am, sexually submissive. I largely attributed this to my first kiss being physically forced on me by a girl called Natalie, but I digress. At the aforementioned school near the wood, I became good friends with a guy called Ben. His sister Alice was also in our year at school. They were twins, you see. Despite that, Ben seemed to distance himself from Alice as much as possible. I assumed this to merely be sibling rivalry, or perhaps an excessive fear of potential embarrassment. Alice had a pretty face, and an attractively plump bottom. Boys mostly ignored her though, partly because she was quiet, and partly because, to be honest, she often looked a bit of a mess. Seemingly unbrushed hair, heavily creased blouse, smudged mascara. Not all the time, but such things weren't rare. I fancied her anyway though. In fact, her intermittently disheveled appearance seemed to me to somehow add to her charm. Her brother Ben noticed the frequency to which I looked at her, and the way that I did so, and told me to stay away from her. I presumed it was just him being protective of his sister, and I ignored him, and asked her out anyway, keeping it a secret from Ben. She wanted to go for a walk in the woods. Frankly, it would have been a very short walk. A very slow walker could have probably got from one side to the other in under 15 minutes. I guessed, therefore, that Alice had more in mind for us to do in the woods than just walk, and this seemed like an exciting prospect. So on the Saturday late in the afternoon, I met her by the wood. We headed in, holding hands. She guided us away from the main trail, and diagonally down the bank, dodging foxholes and branches. Suddenly, she turned to me and said, "Do you like bondage, Henry?" I blushed. We were still quite young, and I didn't expect Alice to also have come across it. Yes, actually," I said. Letting go of my hand, she crouched down by a large tree with a hollow in the trunk, reached into the dark, damp hole, and retrieved from it a small metal box. She set it on the ground and flicked open the clasps. When she opened it, my eyes went wide at the contents. A wide variety of items, almost none of which I expected Alice to possess. Cigarettes, a pocket knife, oracle cards, an adult toy, and some other items. Most relevantly to her inquiry, there was a pair of handcuffs, real ones, not the sort where you flick a little switch and they open. No, these ones required the key. She cuffed me to a tree, and I cooperated. It was exciting. I guessed that kissing would follow, or maybe more if I were lucky. After all, the contents of her secret stash suggested that she was more of a bad girl than I had thought. My anticipation became visible through my trousers. Alice smirked at the proof of my arousal. It crossed my mind that if she knew about bondage, she might also know about things like pain play. But that didn't sound too bad either. Of course, I was imagining the safe, sane, and consensual kind of slap on the cheek and a pinch kind of thing. Nothing that were likely to cause real harm. Unfortunately, it turned out that Alice was much further than that cute, shy girl than she actually seemed. She turned back to the little box. The next item to be taken out was the pocket knife. She unfolded it, made eye contact, and licked along the blade suggestively, and stepped towards me. I was scared now. Was she messing with me? No way she'd use that on me, right? Alice? What are you doing? I said with a shaky voice. She breathed her answer into my ear. Let's call it penetration. She grinned at her sinister pun, flicked the blade twice like a nurse flicks a syringe, and plunged it into me. I screamed. She pulled it in and out and thrust it in me again. I screamed again and began to cry. She laughed at my tears and continued her torture. In total, she stabbed me 5 times on the right side of my stomach, just above my left hip, my right arm, my left shoulder, and my right thigh, narrowly missing my femoral artery. If she'd severed that, it's doubtful I would have survived. By either blind luck or divine providence, a young, strong man called Edward was passing the old grassy bridge, heading home from an afternoon of running practice at the athletic track. At about the moment of my first or maybe second scream, hearing it, he bravely rushed into the woods and, following the sound of my subsequent screams and pleas for mercy, managed to find the bloody scene with remarkable speed. Seeing Edward appear, the expression of sadistic glee on her blood-spattered face turned into one of terrible anger, likely rooted in the frustration of the interruption of her twisted and grotesque act. She slashed her knife at him. Unfortunately for her, Edward was a keen martial artist. Impressively, he disarmed her without her landing a single stab or cut on him. I cannot accurately describe his techniques. I was preoccupied with enduring my excruciating pain. In the end, Alice had a broken arm and was pinned face down on the ground while Edward called for the ambulance service and police force. I was in hospital for a long time. I needed blood transfusions, and I had lost a dangerous amount of blood. I needed my wounds to be stitched together, antibiotics for infections, and also surgery on my intestines, as the stab to my stomach had lacerated them. With results both life-threatening and also disgusting to a puke-worthy degree. I'm sure listeners will sympathize that I pressed charges, given the seriousness of the assault, though they may also think I'm an idiot for getting myself into that situation. There was of course a trial, and unsurprisingly, Alice was found guilty of grievous bodily harm. She is now in prison. I believe there was a psychiatric assessment for her, but no diagnosis was made that could have made her innocent by reason of insanity. As I understand it, she was just essentially sexually sadistic, but at the most extreme and violent end of the scale, and lacking the strength of conscience necessary to restrain herself from acting out her darkest fantasies. I'm still friends with Ben, but I don't go into his house because his mother is pissed that I put her daughter in a cage. She seems to vow Alice's sentence as disproportionate retribution for a silly mistake. Ben appears embarrassed that his mother is not more understanding than that. It turns out that Ben knew, or at least strongly suspected, that his sister was dangerous, and he had tried to warn me away. That time, when I thought he was just being protective. Alice had bullied Ben growing up, was apparently rebellious and somewhat hostile when not in public, and watched very extreme sadomasochist adult content. After catching her watching a shock video, Ben had snooped on her browser history, and it was jaw-dropping. Her browser history was actually involved in the trial as evidence, just to prove her fascination with sexualized violence. I learnt the hard way not to let people you barely know tie you up. Sadly, women and even girls can be violent too, not just males. Many years ago, I met up with a girl I knew from high school called Sandy. She was more of an acquaintance back then, and we were never intimate. Even though we hung around with different groups of friends, I remember she once invited me to a party at her house, but nothing ever evolved past that. In fact, I met my high school girlfriend Andrea at that very party. It had been several years since graduation, and I met her on the street. We chatted a bit, and to make a long story short, I ended up at her place that night. Following a glass or two of wine, we ended up doing it on the bed in the living room. Nothing extraordinary, but it was okay. And after a few minutes, she got out of bed and shuffled to the kitchen, which was located at the far end of the living room. I was still in bed, but glanced over in a groggy post-coitus haze. She entered the kitchen and flipped the light on. This is when things get weird. First of all, the kitchen light must have been an old ceiling fixture with those long fluorescent tubes. It kicked on with a loud groan like an old arc welder. The light that came blasting out of the kitchen was a god-awful wavelength of intense radiation that bleached everything in its path. While the rest of the living room was still dark, the doorway to the kitchen had this weird glow, and the noise from the fixture didn't help matters. This brought me to my senses somewhat, but as time passed, an intuition that something was wrong hit me. At first, I thought I heard a hushed conversation in the kitchen. I don't know if Sandy had a roommate, but being butt naked, I instantly grabbed my clothes. Another minute had passed, and because there were no footsteps or the usual awkward peek around the corner, I figured she must have been on the phone. The hushed conversation in the kitchen started growing louder, and it sounded like Sandy was having a tight-lipped argument with someone on the phone. This made me rather uncomfortable, so I got out of bed and stealthily put my clothes on. Now roughly 5 minutes had passed and I was dressed, and I sat on the side of the bed trying to listen in and figure out what was going on. My phone theory disappeared when I thought I heard two enraged voices. The problem was that they were both unmistakably coming from Sandy. I started thinking about bailing for the front door. The kitchen meltdown took a drastic turn as I heard sounds of a cutlery drawer being slammed open. Panic set in when the unmistakable clang sound of metal on metal began. I started scanning the dark living room for a weapon, and then all grew insanely quiet. The light went out, but not without making a final groan before the darkness. I followed the sound of footsteps out of the kitchen and across the living room. I froze. While Sandy walked up to me with a smile on her face, I was looking at her empty hands. Even though they were empty, I was crapping myself. Her voice reverted back to the calm and sweet one. She asked, "Do you really have to go?" I lied and told her I got dressed because she sounded busy. I really didn't know what else to say to her. I noped out of there as best I could under the circumstances and never heard from her again. A few months ago, I met another female classmate. Curious, I told her that I bumped into Sandy not too long ago. And she says, "Oh, poor Sandy. I heard that she was released a while back." What? So I uttered an, "Oh, really?" "Oh, yeah. She was institutionalized shortly after high school. Complete breakdown." I tried creating distance by saying we were only acquaintances, and I remembered her from that party at her house. "Oh, that party. I'm not sure if anyone ever told you this, but she had planned at that party for months in advance to try and snare you. Unfortunately, Andrea beat her to it." Thank God for Facebook. I'm now married and in a faraway state. No class reunions for me, though. Ever. Sandy ended up fine, recently went back to school and has a professional position. Good for her. But class reunions are still out of the question, though. When I was 19, I was still living with my family, as well as working 2 jobs to save up money. 1 food service and 1 retail. I was also extremely depressed. I had been sexually assaulted the year prior and was still taking everything really hard. How I very poorly dealt with my depression was sleeping around, drinking, and a whole lot of weed. I stopped counting who I was sleeping with once my body count hit the 40s. One of the ways I got my hookups was through a very popular BDSM website. I was casually chatting with a guy called Charlie. We met in a public park, and even though he was a little strange, he didn't seem dangerous. I made it very clear from the get-go that I didn't want anything serious whatsoever, strictly friends with benefits. I also kept him around because he was 27 and bought me booze with my money. After a few weeks of this, he admitted to me he was autistic, which didn't bother me in the slightest, because I'd met many people on the spectrum who functioned like normal members of society. Everything was going relatively okay, until I found out that some of my co-workers knew him. The ones who knew him were all around the same age, so it of course didn't surprise me. But naturally I was curious and asked around what people knew of him. My boss, who knew him, simply said he was strange. A co-worker in a differing department said he gave her super creepy vibes all through high school. And one of my co-workers, who I saw almost every other shift, said that Charlie was almost always actively trying to break him up and his boyfriend. I thought it was super strange, didn't know he was bi, didn't really care. I confronted Charlie about it, and he told me some half-truths about how he had a crush on my co-worker. I told them to leave them alone because they were newly engaged. Over these 2 months, I met a guy through my food service job who I really liked. His name was Beck, and because I liked Beck a lot, I started distancing myself from Charlie. Well, of course, he doesn't like this and starts giving off some red flags. Charlie told me he was almost positive he was schizophrenic. I told him that even though I was a psych major, I was no way near being qualified enough to help him, nor did I really want to, but I encouraged him to find help, and even recommended my own therapist or her husband. He told me he already went to both of them for psychiatric care when he was 15, and they both diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, and dismissed him. I inquired to my therapist about the last time she or her husband diagnosed someone, specifically a minor with APD. She said that neither of them had ever, as it was pretty rare, and I confronted Charlie about his lying, and he denied ever doing so. He continued to try and talk to me about his mental health, which I didn't mind listening to, but I wasn't qualified or let alone licensed to give advice on other than seek help. Charlie then dropped the bomb that he wholeheartedly believed he was a 300-year-old Nazi vampire who killed Jewish infants during World War II in a past life. I tell him he needs to seek serious help if he's having these thoughts and false memories. Charlie also said he'd been having dreams about my parents' dogs tearing him apart, and that he had also had dreams about murdering me. My body kind of kicked into survival mode, so I faked getting a phone call from my parents to have an excuse to leave. I cut off all contacts with him shortly after, at the advice of my now boyfriend, Beck, as well as my parents. I am now also in the process of moving in with him, and I was going to have to break it off with Charlie anyhow. Charlie constantly sent text messages and leaves numerous voicemails, but I only ever had the idea to record one of them, in which he begs me to stay and to not leave him behind, like my retail co-worker did. Things go a little quiet for a few days, and I think he's finally given up, until one evening at my food service job he shows up. I immediately took off my gloves and ran into the back room. My boss follows me and basically asks me what the hell's going on, because I'm doing this in the middle of a rush. I tell him a very, very condensed story of what's happening and beg him to let me stay in the back and work instead. I can tell he's skeptical, but lets me stay in the back as long as I work. I tell Beck to let him know what's going on, and he hauls ass to my job. While talking to Beck, 2 of my co-workers were helping Charlie with his order, when he said, "I know Lily's in the back hiding from me." He paid for his food, leaves, and my co-workers tell me it's safe. Beck is outside waiting for him and tells him very firmly without threatening that I didn't want to see him anymore for any reason. Charlie tries saying that he only came there for the food. Beck tells him there's another restaurant like this downtown. Beck made sure I'm okay and then left. When I return home, I tell my parents what's happening, and they tell me to get a restraining order. Beck and my retail co-workers came with me to the police station to file the report. My uncle, a retired lawyer, gets in contact with an old friend who will be my counsel. My uncle, my lawyer, and Charlie's lawyer all talk and come to an agreement that if Charlie never talks to me or comes to my place of work ever again, I will drop all charges. But if he doesn't abide by the restriction, he will be tried and likely lose, since I have numerous witnesses and video evidence to back me up. The ending is slightly anticlimactic, but he does as he's told. So yeah, that was my unfortunate stalking experience. Let me start off by saying that I am not a street-smart person, or I wasn't several years ago. I've always been pretty naive and trusting, which has landed me in some pretty crappy situations, but this one was by far the scariest. So I had recently just gone through a really horrible, bitter breakup with my boyfriend, and found myself living alone after he packed up his bags and left. I didn't really know many people in the area, so tended to turn to the internet to pass the time. Long story short, I started chatting to a guy called John, and we really hit it off, and it turned out he lived relatively nearby. And by relatively nearby, I mean a half-hour walk away. So we decided to meet up the next day and see how it went. I phoned my friend Annie, who's infinitely wiser and more cynical than I, and told her what the plan was. She insisted she come with me, as I didn't know the guy, and he could be an axe murderer, blah blah blah. So the next day, Annie and I meet with John at around lunchtime in a local pub. It was midsummer, so we sat outside in the beer garden. It was pretty busy despite it being lunchtime, and this place was right next to a busy road, so there was nothing to worry about, right? We get some food and a beer, and we're all chatting. It's going pretty well. We're all hitting it off and having a laugh. We're taking it in turns to go to the bar to get around. I don't know if this is a term outside of England, where one person buys drinks for the whole group and then the next person goes and does the same and so on. So the day is turning into the afternoon, which is turning into the evening. The pub is filling up, and we barely notice the time goes by as we're having a good time, and are filled with 5 or 6 beers, and we're pretty tipsy. John goes to the bar to get his next round in, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up the next morning in my own bed. My face is hurting, and there is blood all over my sheets. I start freaking out at this point because I literally have no recollection of what the hell happened between 8 PM and waking up the next day. I don't know where the blood had come from, and I don't know why I'm hurting. So tentatively, I get up and take a look in the mirror. Now my face is an absolute mess. It looks like I've been in a fight and lost badly. I have a black eye, split lip, half of my face is scrapped and bruised, and I felt sick. I was gobsmacked. What the hell happened? I open my bedroom door and go to the bathroom when I see from the corner of my eye John lying naked on my sofa. Now at this point I'm just losing my mind and start yelling at him like a crazy person, demanding he tell me what the hell's going on. He eventually calms me down and explained to me that I got out of my mind wasted the night before, how I was embarrassing myself, slurring and stumbling all over the place, and eventually I fell over a picnic bench and hit my head pretty hard. Apparently I was bleeding and refused help from anyone, so he called me a cab and brought me home like the absolute knight in shining armor that he is. I don't remember any of this, not a single moment, and I had a million questions, but at the same time I was utterly speechless. I know I'd had a few drinks, but it was no more than an average person would consume at a night out in the club. I'd had many of those. Was it possible that I'd had just one too many? I guess so. What other explanation was there? I just looked at John with my mouth open, heart absolutely pounding, and eventually managed to muster, "I'm gonna be sick." So John looked after me that morning. He peppered the day with the old tale of the dumb things I'd done the night before, and how I would never have gotten back without him. I ate and got dressed, and by the afternoon I was feeling better, so he said he wanted to take me to his house to make me dinner so that we could resume our date. You know, from the point where I'd ruined it by getting blackout drunk. So I said sure. It was nice of him to still want to hang out after everything. Like I said, I'm a naive twat. I didn't really have much situational awareness at all, so we get to his house late in the afternoon. But when I say his house, he lived in a static caravan in a caravan park. I mean, it was nice enough on the inside, but I couldn't help but get a creepy vibe from it. It was tiny. The layout was open. You open the front door into the living room, and further in you have the kitchen, the dining area, then through a door into a tiny hall where you have 2 small bedrooms and a titchy bathroom, and then there's the back door to the main bedroom. Now, I'm sitting in the dining area while he's cooking, and we're just generally making chit-chat. I'm feeling pretty awkward now because I can still remember absolutely nothing of the night before, so it feels like there's already been a power shift, like he knows more about it than me. I'm aware of it, and it's really uncomfortable. I decide I would eat his food and then politely excuse myself home. I didn't know what I was thinking coming here in the first place. I'm a pretty go-with-the-flow type of person, but even I had started thinking, what the hell am I even doing here? Just then, he asks how I'm feeling, and as I'm deep in thought, without even thinking about it, I say, I feel like I've been drugged, distractedly. At this point he flips out. He goes insane, saying that I'm accusing him. How dare I accuse him of things, and I can't prove it, and that I'm just trying to cause all sorts of problems for him. And he's on parole, so I'm basically sending him back to jail with my lies. I had no idea that he was on parole. He would later tell me, in his insane rambling texting sessions, that he was arrested for domestic assault. Great. He starts literally getting stuff out of his kitchen, and just smashes them. Throwing plates against the wall, pulling the toaster out the socket, and smash that on the floor, and just having a meltdown while I'm sitting there in the tiny caravan dining table, 5 feet away, contemplating what the hell is even going on. I move to stand up, and tell him I think I'd better go, when he suddenly lunges at me and shoves me as hard as he can. I'm on my knees, and he's laying blows into me and telling me I'm not going anywhere. He's between me and the front door at this point, and I can't see an escape route, so I turn heel and run through the corridor with him chasing me inches behind me. I dive into the nearest door and slam it shut. I'm in the tiny spare room, and there's no window that opens. I'm trapped. He's outside pounding at the door and calling me every vile curse word in his vocabulary. I yell at him to go away and he stops banging. I hear him leave for a few moments and then all of a sudden, loud thumps. He was trying to break down the door. I'm absolutely terrified at this point. I'm pushing with all my weight back against the door as if my life depended on it, which I guess it really did. The thumping carried on for what seemed like forever. Then I guess he got tired, as I heard him go to the living room and start shuffling around. I still stayed, backed against the door, sobbing for at least another hour. Eventually I hear the TV come on. He's actually sitting chilling watching some TV like nothing happened, while he basically had me hostage cowering in his spare bedroom. I felt a flick of anger and adrenaline at this point. I ever so slowly and quietly opened the door to peer out. The hall is in darkness, and the door to the living room is shut. I'm alone, but I'd have to walk past him to get to the front door. I'm desperately thinking of a way I can get out when I remember the back door. I creep over to it as silently as I could and prayed that it was unlocked. It was. I silently thanked every single god I could think of and crept out, shutting the door silently behind me. I crept down the steps and then just ran. Sobbing and delirious, I was so confused. I had no idea where I was. It was pitch dark, and I'd never been in this part of town before. I ran to the nearest payphone and used the change in my pocket to call my friend to pick me up. My bag and purse were still in John's caravan, along with some other personal possessions I just abandoned. My friend drove me home, and I sobbed the whole way. I never told them what happened, and they never asked. I just got home and went to bed and cried myself to sleep. The next morning I awoke to find my phone that I'd left at home. It had about 50 text messages on it, mostly from John, telling me he's going to petrol bomb my house and kill my family, and that if he ever saw me in the street he would stab me to death, and he'd happily go to jail if it meant I were dead. I deleted them all. I was scared out of my mind. I just wanted it all to be over and to forget about him. I never really told anyone what happened, not to the full extent anyway. As the days went by, I would get crazy rambling texts from him, one moment threatening to kill me and the next telling me he loved me and he's sorry. I deleted every message as soon as I received it. They gradually grew less frequent, and I changed my number, and not long after didn't hear from him again. I got in contact with Annie a while later. Turns out she has no memory from about 8 p.m. that night, and her boyfriend had an incoherent voice message from her, babbling and screaming and crying. He picked her up, wandering bewildered, by a nearby housing estate. I know we should have gone to the police. I know I should have told someone. I know there's a million things I could have done. But I just wanted it to be over. It was the surrealest thing that had ever happened to me. And I still sometimes think back and wonder if it really did happen because it was just so insane. My good friend Andrew had been talking to a girl, Lily, from the UK for almost a year online. She was cute, sweet, and had all kinds of friends and a loving family. Lily had hundreds of photos and anecdotes, and a seemingly real life. Her friends and family would all post comments on her MySpace page, telling her how they had an awesome weekend, that they wanted to hang out with her soon, and that they were sorry they missed their call and happy birthday, etc. Eventually, Andrew started to have deep feelings for Lily. He told his parents about her, then his close friends. Andrew bought endless amounts of calling cards and would phone her whenever convenient for both. At around 9 months into it, Lily expressed an interest in moving to the US so that she could be closer to him. There had been talks about moving in together. Lily told Andrew she had spoken to her parents, and they suggested that she visit with a friend before committing to a move. Andrew was over the goddamn moon. He walked around for weeks talking about Lily, and how amazing she was, and how she was going to be visiting for a week, and how we all had to meet her. When Andrew went to pick up Lily and her friend from the airport, Lily wasn't there. The two individuals he met called themselves Jenny and Sam, sister and brother, or so they claimed. The story was that Lily became anxious and nervous about flying overseas to meet the love of her life, and swapped her ticket out for Sam at the last minute. Jenny and Sam were supposed to see if Andrew was who he claimed to be, as well as scope out the area and check out the town. When Andrew returned home, he talked online with Lily for a few hours, with her apologizing profusely. He reassured her and told her it was okay, and that he understood her nervousness. I met Jenny and Sam at the party. Andrew was towing them everywhere, trying to impress them, so that they only had good things to report back to Lily. Jenny and Sam were normal. They stuck together the whole time, drank some beers, laughed at jokes, struck up conversations. The only thing that would have seemed odd were the amount of photos they were taking. But at the same time, it was assumed that they were trying to document their trip for Lily. A couple of days before Jenny and Sam had to leave, they told Andrew the truth. Honestly, I don't know if it's the real truth, and I don't think I'll ever know. Their names weren't Jenny and Sam. They weren't related. There was no Lily. Lily was really someone named Alicia. All the photos of Lily on MySpace had been taken from her MySpace. The photos and family members were all Alicia's friends, but with different names. All the comments on Lily's profile and photos were fabricated. They were put there by these fake friends and relations. Alicia had no idea that this doppelganger profile existed. She had no idea that Andrew existed. Jenny and Sam told Andrew that there was a fake profile for him as well, and they showed it to him. His doppelganger was just named Justin or something like that. Justin had all the same family members and friends that Andrew had, but with different names. They told Andrew they'd been playing this game for a while, but it wasn't just them. They could count 20 people off the top of their head that were in this game from all over the world. They pulled out this book for Andrew to look at. This is the part that really freaked me out. It was the book of Andrew's life. Every single piece of information Andrew had shared with Lily was documented in this book. There was an excerpt from their chat log, i.e., Andrew hung out with Brian today. He's my best friend. Lily, oh yeah, that's the guy with you in your default photo, right? Any pertinent information, i.e. photos of Brian, and a brief description of who he is to Andrew, and footnotes. The footnotes were extensive and unbelievable. In this example of Brian, it would include things like 1. Dating Karen P., page 22. 2. Was in a band with Eric J., page 17, and Mike C., page 9. 3. Is Brad D's younger brother, page 11. The amount of linked information in this book was the biggest mind melt. It was an extensive web, the network of friends and family in the group. It included all kinds of information and pictures. Jenny and Sam had admitted to taking all the photos on their trip so that they could add it to this book and add it to the profiles online. Andrew kept the book and refused to give it back to them, and he kicked them out of his house. He was shocked and heartbroken. Later on, he logged onto his messenger client, and Lily instant messaged him. He told her that he knew she wasn't real, that it had been a giant WTF, and he wanted to know what the person pretending to be Lily had to gain. Lily didn't respond. She stopped talking to Andrew, and Andrew never received a real answer in regards to what he endured. I saw the book before Andrew shredded and burnt it. There was a photo and a small blurb about me in there. 1. Recently moved from unknown city, California. 2. Dating Aaron B. Page 6. City police officer. 3. Good friends with Allison S. Page 26. And Reed P. Page 21. 4. Hates soda, gum, flip-flops, loves Harry Potter, beers, cookies. I'm sharing this in the hopes that it becomes a kind of cautionary tale to other insecure people who meet other people online. When I was 16, I was very insecure with myself. I had had a hard time making friends and was basically invisible to boys. I made a lot of friends online in chat rooms. Mind you, this was the early 2000s. It was during the summer that I was staying with my sister to watch her kids because she broke her foot of carnival, and my 2 nieces and nephew were a huge handful for her. So I got to stay up all night to use the computer. I was pretty lonely because I just moved from my old school following the divorce of my mum and stepdad, and couldn't really hang out with my friends for a while because of my situation. I talked to a few guys, even video chatted a few times, but it was all quite innocent. Until I met a guy from California. He wouldn't tell me his age and wouldn't even send a picture, but I got the impression that he was an adult because he told me he had his own apartment. He claimed his camera was broken, totally legit, right? He even tried to talk to me into coming out and visit him. He told me he would get me a ticket and we could meet. He told me that I would have the time of my life and that we could do things together. He seemed excited about the fact that I'd never been with anyone before. After about a week, he convinces me to lift up my shirt so that he can see me. It took a lot of convincing and he was like, "Come on, it's only me." Stupidly, I gave in. I didn't really think much about it afterwards, but I never did it again, and I continued to talk to him. But when summer was winding down, my sister didn't really need my help anymore, so I wasn't at her house or able to use her computer. One day, about 2 weeks before school started back up, my best friend Amanda called me and said, "Hey, I have a question for you. Why am I looking at a picture of your tits right now?" I was completely floored. For a while, I didn't even know what she was looking at. I didn't even know what to say. I could only ask what she meant, and she told me that a random guy just sent her an attachment, and when she opened it, it was me. The guy's screen name was the guy I had been talking to. She'd also gotten calls from some other people that we were friends with, because they had also gotten the picture. Apparently, this guy had hacked me. He got my friends list. My neighbor got the picture. I know because he approached me about it. He was really nice and understanding about the situation. He had a sister about my age and felt really protective of me. But oh my god, it was so embarrassing. And I begged him to not tell my mum, which he didn't. Amanda had to get into her parents' email profiles because he had also hacked into her list somehow and sent it to everyone on hers. Her parents both had emails with the attachment of the picture. They never got the picture and never found out. We were able to keep it pretty quiet. The only people who knew were my peers. I eventually got online again and found about 100 messages from him. I finally messaged him back and asked him why, and he said it was because I hadn't returned his messages. He got mad at me because I stopped talking to him. I told him he had ruined my life and all he had to say was sorry, before he blocked me. He didn't contact me again, and he didn't send out my picture anymore. But as far as I know, about 20 or 30 kids I had gone to school with had gotten the picture. I was glad that I didn't go to that school anymore. But every time I visited and we went around town, I saw people I'd gone to school with, and I knew that they knew. They'd point and laugh, and I was never more glad that I didn't have a computer at home. I didn't even use my AIM profile when I visited Amanda's or my sister's house. To the adult man who tried to completely ruin my life when I was still in high school because you felt that I'd rejected you, I hope that you got caught somehow, and no one ever fell for your nonsense. I hope you went to prison, and had all these things that you wanted to do to me done to you. And I hope to God we never ever meet. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. Really hope you enjoyed tonight's set of stories. I'll be back again tomorrow with a nice fat compilation for you all. So yeah, I really hope that you stick around for that. Gentle reminder that we do have the app campaign going on right now. It is, really exciting. We're definitely making some headway, and I'm really excited to see this off the ground, and hopefully with all of you sooner than you think. Ad-free, it's just really, really good. I'm really excited. So please consider checking it out. You do get rewards for signing up, including the app itself, which is pretty cool, and then you can give us feedback and we can play around with it together. So yeah, all good things, all good things. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons. Halloween is coming up really soon and I'm so excited. And we're almost at 300k, so it's a really exciting time. And it's the 6-year anniversary of the channel on Halloween. So yeah, it's like loads of things. Will we beat 300k before we turn 6? Oh, have to wait and see. So yeah, all of that's going on. I'll probably live stream when we're about to and or hit 300k. But yeah, I'm just so stoked. I've also got a little mini announcement, and that is that this year's Halloween special, it's another set of 100 ghost stories, will actually be released a day before Halloween on the 30th, because I usually post my big videos on Saturdays, so it's not going to be a comp, it's going to be fresh stories, 100 of them. So yes, 100 fresh ghost stories on the 30th, and then you can just devour them the 30th and the 31st, seeing as Halloween falls on Sunday this year. So yes, it's also Pandora's first Halloween, so I get to, she did it 2 years ago, but I think this time she understands a bit more what it's about. Anyway, enough gibbering from me. Thank you all and everyone. See you tomorrow. Stay awesome.